Hi YouTube. I have recently acquired a very old and quite frankly legendary punch needle. This is the Craftsman punch needle, and it would be absolutely remiss of me to come into possession of something like this and not make a video about it. So keep watching to see me unbox and demo this needle and even make a project out of it. Now, this video would be incomplete without going into the history of punch needle. And don't click off the video, I promise this will be interesting. So, the style of punch needle I do developed from the North American rugmaking traditions of the late 1700s, early 1800s, around that time period. The first mass market punch needle was patented by a man named Ebenezer Ross in Toledo, Ohio in 1881. It was called the Griffin, and its creation spurred hundreds of more punch needles onto the market. Looking at these early punch needles, you cannot tell me that these don't look like medieval torture devices. Not gonna lie to you, it would be fun to collect them and try them out, but can you imagine customs scanning my package and seeing these? I think I'd get put on some kind of a list. The Craftsman punch needle was historically one of the most famous punch needles. It went by different names, including the Columbia Deluxe Needle, the Minerva Deluxe Needle, the Athena Deluxe Needle, and various other names. Unfortunately, this needle is no longer manufactured, so your best bet in terms of getting one of these would be places like antique shops, garage sales, or eBay, which is where I got mine. So let's open up this package and take a look. I'm surprised at how small the box is for this punch needle, especially when I compare it with an Oxford punch needle box, which you can see. I believe that this version I bought here is the oldest version of the Craftsman punch needle. My best estimate for when this was made is 1932, which makes this needle almost 100 years old. Opening up the box, we have a very brittle instruction sheet, the punch needle holder, and the 4 different needle sizes. Yes, this is an adjustable, interchangeable punch needle, kind of the precursor to some of the big box craft store versions that you might find today. The instruction sheet is kind of really confusing, but I'm going to try my best here to insert the needle and adjust it. I'm just really scared to break it. The needle wasn't incredibly expensive, but this is a rare item, you know? But after a bit of fiddling around and finding a video example of someone inserting the needle, thank you Shauna Foskett, you're the best, I figured it out. On each of the needles, there's a notch, and you have to slide the needle into the holder with the notch facing forward. Then you can slide the notch into a groove depending on the loop length you want, and then push the barbed holder up to lock it into place. Pretty cool stuff. Before I could test out the Craftsman needle with some yarn, there was one thing I needed to do. The instruction sheet I received with the needle was intact, but super brittle. I mean, I would expect as much for something that's 100 years old, but I wanted to make sure that I could save the instructions if something ever happened to the original. So I scanned them. Yay for archiving! Now I want to see what types of yarn will correspond with each of the needles. I'm gonna take the thickest needle, which is the number 2 needle, and just looking at it, I think it would go well with some good old rug yarn. Now, to thread this punch needle, you have to first thread the yarn through this bottom hole, and then through the eye of the needle, and then fiddle the yarn around a little so that the yarn goes right into the groove. Sound familiar? This is the needle that Amy Oxford based her Oxford punch needles on, and she used the Craftsman needle for years before inventing the Oxfords. Not only are the threading systems between the two similar, but also the numbering systems. Take a look at the numbers on the side of the needle holder here. Amy Oxford based her punch needle loop height numbering system right from the Craftsman. So the 8, 9, and 10 on the Craftsman needle are the same as the 8, 9, and 10 Oxford punch needles. I have to say, I do prefer the Oxford needles for threading just because it feels a little bit more difficult with the craftsman to get my yarn into the groove. So as you can see, the Briggs & Little Super I'm using works great with the number 2 needle. Next, we have the number 1, and I think something between worsted Aran weight yarn and bulky rug yarn would work well. So I'm gonna try some Briggs & Little Atlantic, which fits perfectly. Next, we have the 0, and this would be the perfect needle for some worsted weight yarn, like the Briggs & Little Heritage. Finally, we have the 00, and I might have to do some yarn surgery here to find the perfect yarn for this needle. I have some white rug tufting yarn here. It's wool, and it's worsted weight, but it feels a lot thinner. So let's try it out as is and see how it goes. Yeah, it's not really doing what it's supposed to. So I guess it's yarn surgery time. What I'm gonna do is take one ply out of the strand that I have here and see if that makes any difference. And that's way better. I think you need quite a finer yarn than what we normally use in punch needle for the 00 needle. Okay, so I want to make a project where I can use all of the needles at all of their lengths as a reference for myself. So I guess what we'll do is we will make a sampler. Let's grab some monk's cloth and cut it up. I'm gonna use this rug hook to take out a couple of strands so that it's easier for me to cut my fabric in a straight line. Fun fact, I learned this trick from my punch needle instructor while I was attending my punch needle certification classes. If you're interested in learning more about that, you should check out the video I made on it. So I'm gonna draw a simple square pattern here that'll allow me to make full use of the craftsman punch needle. And I was really going into this wanting to make a smaller project, but I only realized after I drew the pattern how big it was. Oops. So the first thing I'm gonna do is outline everything with white rug yarn. And I'm not gonna lie to you, using the craftsman really made me value my Oxford needles, because man, this needle is not ergonomic. Like, my hands started hurting and I barely started. I also feel like I make better stitches with the Oxford, at least on the back, but maybe that's just because I'm not used to the craftsman yet. I also wanted an opportunity to use the stem stitch with the craftsman needle, so I added a second border on the outside using that stitch. If you don't know what the stem stitch is, I've done it before in some other videos. It's basically just turning your punch needle 90 degrees to the left, and it makes really nice tubular loops. So now it's time to fill in the sampler. I'm starting off with the number 2 needle on the 10 setting, which will make loops just like an Oxford 10 regular. I then punched with the 10 setting using the 1, 0, and 00 needles before realizing that it would be a big pain in the butt to keep switching needles to fill in the rest of the sampler. So I went back to the 2 and decided to fill in the sampler one needle at a time, which was a lot easier. As you can see, we're moving from the 10 to the 9, 8, 7, and 6. Turning it around, it's not super visible, but I'm sure you can see the difference in loop height by comparing the 7 in green to the 10 in red. The difference will be more visible and more pronounced the longer our loops get, with the 5, 4, 3, 2, and finally the 1. But I won't show you everything just yet. You'll have to watch until the end to see the full sampler. Now, before we move on to the other needle sizes, I want to let you know that only 20% of the people who watch my videos are actually subscribed to me. 20%! Like, come on guys, get it together. Are we not better than this? But really, if you're watching this right now and you like the videos I make, let me know by liking this video, subscribing, and turning on the bell. This will notify you every time I upload a new video. Subscribing helps me a bunch so that I can keep making high quality content that you can enjoy. Thanks! Now back to the video. So I moved on to the number 1 needle next, punching all of the squares with the needle, and then I stopped doing what I said I would. No, listen, you don't get it. My room was absolutely overflowing with all the yarn I set out for this. I kind of just wanted to put certain yarns away so that my room wouldn't be a mess, so I filled in some 00 sections as well. But I did go back to the 0 needle and punched in the rest of the squares. And as I got to the tallest loop heights, aka the 2 and the 1, I had to be really careful that I wasn't punching through other loops, because these loops are super tall, and I learned that when you punch with these heights, the loops tend to, overflow a little, making it even easier to punch through them. So I basically had to hold the pre-existing loops back while I punched new ones. And finally, I punched in the final 00 squares. And the 00 needle size is so funny because not only do you have to punch into every hole of your monk's cloth, you also have to punch in every single row as well. So as you can see, I'm making really tiny stitches, and towards the end, having an absolutely horrible time. Why am I doing this? Why did I get myself into this situation? Someone please take me out of my misery. Okay, we're done. Yay! But one problem still remains. All of these blank rectangles. And you're probably thinking, Vrinda, bestie, you have done absolutely everything with just the squares. What is there left to do with the rectangles? Well, dear viewer, what we're gonna do is we're gonna have some fun. I'm gonna use these remaining rectangles on my sampler for a bunch of fun little punch needle tricks and techniques. I've already done all of these with the Oxford punch needles before, but I want to try them out with the craftsman needle. And the first thing I really want to try is using wool strips. Now I don't have pre-cut wool strips that are thin, so I'm manually doing this with some number 8 cut wool strips that I have. Y'all have no idea how much dust these things are making. I feel like even looking at them too intensely is creating dust, but I desperately want to use these up. I used a bunch of them already in my video where I tried rug hooking, but I still have some left over. So I'm using the number 1 needle to punch with the wool strips, and they break super easily, so I have to be really careful with punching so that I can use all of the strips that I cut. I'm using the number 2 needle with some other 8 cut strips on another rectangle just to see the difference. Next is sculpting. I'm really excited to sculpt with the craftsman needle. Using the number 2 needle, I'm starting off with a short loop height and then increasing the loop height bit by bit until I get to the center of this rectangle, which will have the tallest loops. Something that I find really cool with the craftsman needle is that you can adjust your loop height while you're punching with no need to cut off your yarn. That is fantastic. That's incredible. And I haven't cut off my yarn tails here, but you can see that our loops are shorter at the corners and then get longer and longer as we go into the middle. I did some sculpting in another rectangle, but kind of in a more free-form way, which you'll see at the end. I'm also going to do some fun novelty stitches like bead stitch. This is where you can alternate 2 different yarns in a single row, creating a pattern that looks like this. Pretty cool, right? I also used multiple strands of yarn with the craftsman, combining my hand-dyed rainbow yarn with some cotton yarn that is definitely not Aran weight in my opinion. I filled in the remaining rectangles just with a variety of things, like some stripes, dots, a plain old circle, as well as some basic shading. And now that I was done with all of my punching, finally, it was time to hem my sampler. I steam pressed the entire thing, feeling very grateful that I didn't use any synthetic fibers that could melt. I cut off my excess fabric to hem my sampler, but something felt wrong. I know I used multiple loop heights in the sampler, but it still felt bumpier than usual. So I decided to press it again, hoping that some of the steam would flatten it out. The entire time I was so confused because it wasn't flattening out. And then I realized there's no water in the iron. How would we be able to steam it when the thing that makes steam isn't there? I'm a clown. I'm a clown. This is clown behavior. But yeah, after pressing it again, I hemmed the entire thing using a mitered corner, pressing it one more time after I was done, and here is the finished sampler. So we've got each needle punched on the 10 setting, the 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. As you can see, I did a little bit of freeform sculpting as well as some shading, which looks pretty cool. And this isn't something that I'm selling, which for those of you that don't know, I do have a shop where I sell punch needle patterns and some of the things that I make. It's pretty cool, check it out. But I'm not selling this. And it's not even a showpiece of sorts. I made this purely as a demonstration and learning opportunity for myself, just to see how the Craftsman punch needle works and how I can use it, because I love punch needling, and I am always itching for more and more opportunities to learn about it and use what I learn in some really cool projects. Thank you all so much for sticking around until the end. Make sure to subscribe, and yeah, that's it. Okay, bye.